Hey everybody, Corey here at SmartCarb. Today we're going to look at installing a new SC2 on a 2020 GasGas EC300. The GasGas is a nice looking bike. Seems to have a minimalistic nature that I've appreciated over the years. I've been riding one since 2011. The bike is a little less complicated than the Sherco that we installed a carburetor on last week. It tends to look like it's just a little less there. The dry weight, they claim to be about the same. They're claiming around 231 pounds dry. That's pretty common for bikes in this category. So I don't think that's really a major selling point, but some of the features of it that I like are the Kayaba suspension compared to some of the older Marzocchi and Öhlins equipped bikes. It seems to have a better stance. It's got the typical GasGas Michelin tires on it, which are pretty good for the Midwest. If you're out west in the mountains, I would recommend something with a little different durometer. These are pretty soft tires. We're going to go ahead and look at some of the nuances of getting the carburetor out and installing the new SmartCarb. Some of the things that are different about the GasGas is that you're not able to move the pipe out of the way when lifting the subframe. You just kind of want to leave it hanging there. They've got a couple of pockets up under there that make it a little bit difficult to slip out without lifting the subframe. So we're going to go ahead and take the seat and the tank off, lift the subframe, give ourselves plenty of room to get in there and work, and we'll talk about some of those nuances as we go. A couple things I'd like to point out during your removal and reinstallation of the SmartCarb, and it's just kind of general housekeeping stuff, but I see a lot of people that will make mistakes or damage components by not using proper tools sometimes, so I just kind of want to walk you through that. When it comes to these spring clamps, you really don't want to mess around. Use a quality set of pliers. Don't use needle noses, it'll tend to deform them. The proper way to grab those is to grab both ears flat with a quality set of pliers and then gently begin to move that out of the way past the spigot. Okay? So get that out of the way first, and then you can get the hose off without, a lot of difficulty or deformation of the hose. Okay, so we're just going to get that out of the way. Another couple of things I want to point out that makes the installation easier is I recommend go ahead and remove the rear clamp from the air filter side and just completely get it out of your way. If you leave it dangling off of that air boot, it's going to scratch up your shock, and we have a dealer that's really nice to let us borrow these bikes, so we want to kind of treat them like better than our own. So go ahead and undo that clamp. You're going to kind of want to just spin it out of there, but don't bend it any more than necessary. And then what I do is I put it back into shape just so that it doesn't get out of whack when we try to tighten it down again. I just hang it off the foot peg. The front one you can use or install just by leaving it on, but you want to loosen it, of course, enough to get it down. And what I usually do is once I get it broke free, I will go ahead and just slip it down over against the front of the air intake boot. So just loosen that enough to get it out of the groove and away from trying to slip the carburetor out. Okay, so we're going to do that. Next thing we're going to do is go ahead and remove the subframe bolts. Now that we've got our clamps loose, there's a 10 millimeter bolt on each side. Again, use a 3/8 drive on this. Don't try to use your 1/4 inch stuff. These bolts are a little hard to come by should you damage one. So again, use quality tools. It's just the 2 bolts. Unlike some bikes, they don't clamp the frame protector with a wire tie or nylon tie, and so you can just slip that right out of there pretty easy. Pay attention to your muffler that's just going to be dangling here because we have to move the subframe in order to get it off, but I just leave it on if you can. Just pay attention that it doesn't fall off on the floor. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and lift the subframe now. Kind of hold on to your carburetor just so in case it should come flying out of there. Okay. I'm going to just bend that out of the way for a minute, and we'll get our tank out of here. Pay attention to the petcock. It kind of wants to touch against the frame and do a little scratching on it. So just gently get that out of the way. Seemingly GasGas has struggled with sourcing carburetors over the years. I know when I was working with them back in 2012, prior to the first financial trouble they ran into, some bikes were coming with Delortos and some with Keyhen PWKs, some with PJs. They were just struggling to get, I guess, carburetors to finish out their builds. But this one's a little bit different in that it's using a Phillips head screw. So again, don't cheapen yourself here and use a screwdriver that's not designed for this type of screw. There's a good chance you'll mess those up and then you've kind of set yourself up for failure. So I recommend using a screwdriver that's quality, has a good tip on it, and in this case a magnetic tip is very handy because these screws aren't encapsulated in the cap like the Allen heads are. So they will come out. You want to make sure you grab it so it doesn't run off on you. Bit of spring tension under there, so we want to hold it down while we get our screw out. Okay, not a lot of room there, but we've got it. Away. Next, you're going to want to remove your slide, get it away from the vent lines. 4-vent Keyhen has a lot of lines. One thing you'll appreciate about the SmartCarb is the cleanliness of the installation. We don't have all of these hoses hanging down. It's just a better form fit factor for not only appearance but just general tidiness. So we want to remove our slide. GasGas is still using the cable guide, which we're going to take off of this cap and put on our new SmartCarb, and then we're able to use the stock throttle cable more or less in the same setting. So we'll check our end play, but you want to go ahead and just take that all out like that. Next, we're going to slip the Keyhen out of there. I find the best method is to get it to release from the front boot by tipping it up, and then you've got a nice area to get it out of there. Okay, we're going to go ahead and prepare our new SC2 for fitment to the GasGas. We've borrowed the cable guide off of the factory carburetor, and so we're just going to go ahead and snug that all the way down. Tighten our lock nut. The new SC2, part of what we've done with it is to shorten the overall length end to end. Over the years, they've been moving the cylinder back and more up and down to try to centralize the mass on these bikes, get us to sit over the top of the mass, and everything has shifted backward. And then with the new Link bikes, there's not a lot of area in here anymore, so we went ahead and shortened this carburetor so that it would fit in there a little bit better. We've recessed some of these areas to let the boot snap on, so it's a better form fit factor today. We're very pleased with the performance that we're receiving out of these. Some of the revised changes we've made include the internal venting passageways. There's no longer external hoses. We've increased the compression area under the slide by lowering this nose. And we have moved this vent scoop down a little bit because this has been a bit of a point of contention, as it were, with installation on a lot of the different bikes. The Keyhens have an oblique shaped hole, and they have a molded in rubber ridge inside of the air boot on the air filter side that can tend to mask the top of this vent scoop a little bit. This has to read the air pressure inside the air filter housing in order to both compensate and provide proper top end fueling and air correction factors. So we're going to go ahead and get this installed in here, and we'll go through some of those details as we go along. We're going to use a 38mm on the GasGas EC300. Our normal rule of thumb is to replace carburetor size for size, with the exception of the KTM Husqvarnas. In that case, we recommend a 36mm for a couple of reasons I'm going to describe to you. You may recall that for quite a few years KTM used a 36mm carburetor. When they swapped to the Mikuni TMX, they didn't have the luxury of getting a 36mm with that carburetor, so they had to opt with the 38. In our opinion, the 38's a little bit large for the KTM Husqvarnas, but depending on your use, if you're doing wide open desert racing or hill climbing or something that sees sustained high RPM, maybe a snow bike, the next size larger carburetor is recommended. The GasGas is set up for the larger carburetor by incorporating a larger intake runner. You'll note that this reed block has 6 bolts compared to the 4. I believe it has an additional reed pedal than the Keyhens. I'm not sure on that. I'd have to look inside of there, but GasGas likes a 38, so that's what we're going to put on this bike. A couple of notable things we want to look for, again with the installation. Inside of these rubber boots, they have a ridge that's designed to butt up against the edge of this carburetor. You can see maybe, it's a bit dark there, but there's a ridge sticking up, and that will sometimes block the bottom end of our Venturi, which is a lot smaller at the bottom. So it's advisable to take a hard look at that. For best performance, we recommend you carve that out to mimic this shape. That'll require removing the boot, which we will do, and we'll describe that process to you. Equally important is on the intake side. Now the GasGas doesn't have as heavy of a ridge as the Sherco did, but there's still a small ridge inside of that air boot that may possibly block or partially shroud the top of our vent scoop. So we're probably going to remove it and go ahead and remove just a bit of material in there so that we make sure that this is completely open. This is highly recommended. This is somewhat optional, but it's a good idea to go ahead and do that. That helps with the low speed bottom settings of the throttle positions. Okay, again, just to reiterate, we want to make sure that this vent scoop is completely open inside of the air filter housing. So what we're going to do, and GasGas has made it very simple, we're going to go ahead and take the filter off, slip the air boot out. We're going to pop it on the carburetor to make note of where, if any, material we need to remove out of there. So we're going to go ahead and take that off. We'll show you how to do that, and then we'll see if we need to remove any material in there. Stiff little spring. Okay, so unlike the Sherco, this has just got a rubber ridge that snaps in the air box, the subframe housing. So we're just going to go ahead and get that started by pushing it out. Comes out real easy. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at that upper portion of the air boot to see if we need to remove any material, and already I'm seeing that there's a bit of a flat right there where they've got this boss molded in. I'm guessing eventually they may have an air temperature sensor or something that they put in this position here. So we're going to snap this on, see how that looks at the top edge of our carburetor, and if we need to possibly remove that material. Sometimes you can heat these up a little and kind of change the shape, but I don't think that'll be necessary. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Kind of guessing about where that should be on top. See where the clamp mark was, so we can assume that that's pretty close to level. Normally there's a parting line here that kind of lets you know that that's in the proper position. So looking down in there, we can see that there is just a small bit of obstruction right at the very top. That may not seem like a lot, but when you consider airflow, that sudden abrupt edge causes deflection, and it will cheat the air pressure that's being read by the carburetor, which is both our air density correction circuit and also the top end fueling based on manifold pressure. So you want to note where you probably going to want to carve that out. I'm kind of going off this being in line with just about the center of my scoop, so when I take that off I'll just grind a little bit to each side of that, and then we'll check it again before we actually install it to make sure we've got that completely cleared out. Okay, now that we've port matched the bottom of the intake flange to match the Venturi floor of the Smart Carburetor, and we've also made sure that there's no vent scoop obstruction inside of the air filter housing, air boot. The first step in installing your new SmartCarb will be to put the cable and the cap and the slide on. We're going to go ahead and slip that in there. use a flat disc washer for retention. You want to go ahead and slip that over it after you've got the spring installed. And as always, pay attention to the metering rod just so you don't scratch it or cause any damage. Just kind of be gentle when putting the slide on. Go ahead and slip the cable through the slide. And we want to make sure that it's fully nestled in the retaining area inside the slide. Just turn your spring loose. Okay, now that we've attached the cap and the slide, we're going to go ahead and slip the carb into the boots. There's quite a bit of room on the GasGas, so it makes it pretty easy. I like to go above the intake flange and just kind of come back in down below it. We're going to go ahead and pop that in there. Next, we're going to install our slide and check our cable in play before we lower the subframe. Get everything routed in the right direction. We're going to go ahead and gently install our slide into the carburetor. You don't need to overly tighten these, but you want to make sure that they're pretty snug. So I just kind of use the deflection in the Allen wrench till it begins to twist just a little bit, and that's usually plenty tight. One thing about the SmartCarb is it has external adjustability. Once it's installed, you don't need to remove the cap again to make any adjustments. I like the GasGas, has a lot of access to. Okay. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and check our cable in play to make sure that we don't have too much that the slide cable might possibly come out of the slide, and that we don't have too little so that the slide will actually rest against the idle set screw. So for my preference, that has a little bit too much slack in it, kind of like I thought when we put it on. So we'll make our changes up here at the handlebar by using the ferrule nut, and you'll want to back that out just a little bit until you get to a happy spot that you like your cable in play to be. Again, we don't recommend too much cable in play. I personally don't like hardly any. So we're going to just kind of live with that right there. You want to tighten this down snug before you go ride, which we'll do before we start it. Next, we're going to tip the carb back up a little bit. It may require us to move this out just slightly in order to get the air boot slipped over the spigot. So we're going to gently lower our subframe. Make sure our hose is down through the swing arm so it doesn't get into the chain. Pay attention to your muffler because it is hanging over here, and we also want to direct our subframe down into the retaining area. Okay. Now we've got that fairly well started, we want to make sure that we go ahead and get the boots completely in where they belong. Okay. I recommend rotating the carburetor out of the way of this chain. GasGas uses a nice long chain guard, unlike the short one they used to. But we want to make sure that we don't have the chain come up and smack the bottom of the float bowl. Little different view. We want to go ahead and again make sure that there's no possible contact with the chain, and also that the carburetor is not touching the transmission or anything hard. You can rotate it 15 degrees either way to accommodate that. So right now we just want to make sure that we have it in the right spot before we put the clamps on it and tighten everything down. Okay, now that we've got our clamps snugged up, we want to twist the carburetor just slightly in the boots to make sure they're moving with it so that we know that they're plenty tight. So we can see that everything is just like it should be. So now we're going to button it up. Okay, we're going to go ahead and hook up the fuel line now. Make sure the hose is fully on there. Go ahead and run our clamp down. Now that we have the fuel line on, we're going to go ahead and fill it up for the first time. You may note that we send it with this caution label attached so that you remember to leave the choke open on the first fill up, but we recommend you open the choke every time you fill the bowl from dry. We're going to go ahead and fill it and start it. Before we start it up, we want to go ahead and make note that we send your SmartCarb setup for your bike. We ask a few questions when you order it. We ask that you also, before you make any adjustments, just let it run for about an hour, moderate riding, and let everything kind of break in a little bit. So let's go ahead and start it. We'll be covering some tuning videos over the next several weeks. We'd like to thank Letko Cycles for letting us borrow this brand new 2020 GasGas, and we invite you to follow along. Stay tuned.